Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the second part of What If Sakura Became a Poison Specialist. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 5, here lies the starting line. Nothing happened. Sakura tried to contain her disappointment. It wasn't like you were expecting anything to happen anyway. The logical part of her reasoned. But something nagged in her mind, something that refused to let go. Why can't I do it? It whispered. Why is it considered a keki I genkai? Why? Why? Sakura had always been curious and had asked a lot of questions the way many kids did. Unlike other kids, she'd learned quickly what she wasn't allowed to ask and what made people uncomfortable. Don't ask about clan techniques or secrets and don't point out their weaknesses. Don't ask for deeper explanations about the subtle propaganda they fed to everyone. Why questions were particularly disliked, so she learned to keep her mouth shut and watch instead of ask. People often showed their true intentions rather than saying them, and Sakura had managed to avoid getting into trouble more than once by observing. There was no way she'd be able to ask about this, so she would just have to watch. Konoha wasn't built in a day, so it would make sense for her to not be able to use the Mokuton yet. The only way she would know is if she kept trying. She who ventures and achieves nothing had gained more than those who didn't dare. Kakashi glared at the folder in his hand, trying to mentally will it to burst aflame. If anyone other than the Hokage himself had not ordered this, he might have burned it himself. Not that he'd ever say it to his face, but the old man must have gone senile if he thought giving Kakashi a genin team was a good idea. One with the son of his sensei no less. He was tempted to just ignore the folders and wing it. Teaching kids couldn't be that hard, could it? He knew he had learned quickly as a child, so wouldn't he be able to show them a technique and then leave them to it? The higher-ups probably wouldn't let him get away with that. Kakashi let out a sigh, deciding to bite the bullet and finally opening the folder. Name, Sasuke Uchiha. Age, 12. Height, 148 centimeters. Weight, 42 kilograms. Rank, Academy student. Affiliation, Konoha. Clan, Uchiha. Immediate family, Fugaku Uchiha, Mikoto Uchiha, Itaki Uchiha. Blood type, AB. Combat classification, Ninjutsu. Combat ranking, 1st. Theoretical ranking, 2nd. Personality, ambitious. Confident bordering on arrogant. Antisocial. Additional notes, has shown to be hostile towards peers. Does not respect those he deems weaker than him. Kakashi wrinkled his nose. Placing him with an Uchiha was bad enough. Some of them still hated the fact that he had Obito's eye, no matter how many times it was explained to them that it was a gift, but they put him with one a near identical personality chart as his own had been when he'd graduated. These weren't the entire folders the village had on these kids, the full ones were filled with every minute detail and mannerism, but it was frowned upon for Jounin senseis to look at the full ones lest they develop too many preconceived notions of their students and didn't bother to get to know them. Stupid in Kakashi's opinion, but he really didn't want to read more than he had to. He put Sasuke's file down and picked up the one with the name Naruto imprinted on it, ignoring the pang in his heart. Name, Naruto Uzumaki. Age, 12. Height, 145 centimeters. Weight, 40 kilograms. Rank, Academy student. Affiliation, Konoha. Clan, Uzumaki. Immediate family, none. Blood type, B. Combat classification, Taijutsu. Combat ranking, 9th. Theoretical ranking, 32nd. Personality, exuberant. Eager to please and prove himself. Ambitious. Additional notes, dislikes and is unreceptive to any form of book learning. May cause trouble if he feels he is being ignored. It was easier to read the file than see him. The file was detached. Analytical. It made it easier to pretend the gaping hole in his chest didn't exist, pretend that the guilt wasn't still eating him alive. Pushing those thoughts aside, he opened the last folder. At least it can't get any worse. Name, Sakura Harano. Age, 12. Height, 150 centimeters. Weight, 37 kilograms. Rank, Academy student. Affiliation, Konoha. Clan, none. Immediate family, Mabuki Harano, Kaizashi Harano. Blood type, O. Combat classification, Genjutsu. Combat ranking, 11th. Theoretical ranking, 1st. Personality, reserved. Curious. Emotional. Additional notes, has a tendency to question orders. Civilian born. So not only did they place him with Naruto and an Uchiha attack his brother no less, but they also put him with a civilian born? It was like the Hokage was trying to kill him. Friend killer Kakashi finally meets his end, killed by his genin team. He mentally shook himself. Nothing he could do about this now. Sakura stared in shock, not quite believing what she was seeing. It was 2 weeks after she had first decided to experiment with the Mokuton, each attempt leading to the same result. Nothing. That was, until today, when she managed something completely unexpected. She'd been upset because she had lost every one of her sparring matches. It had felt that despite all her work she would never manage to catch up and that all her effort was useless. To make matters worse, she couldn't train with Shino because he had a clan meeting, and the school grounds were being used by the year below them for the entire week for survival training. By the time she'd returned home to an empty house, Sakura had practically been boiling with rage. She had tried to make it a habit to attempt the Mokuton 3 times a day. Once before she sent to school, once when she returned from it, and once before she went to bed. That way she was trying multiple times a day, but not too many in a row, so she was less likely to get frustrated. Not wanting to break the habit despite her anger, Sakura had sat down next to the pot and pushed chakra into the seed a little more aggressively than she usually did, paying less attention to how much she'd put in it as well. The seed exploded. The shock had cut through her rage, leaving her gaping and frozen. This wasn't what she'd been trying to do, not by a long shot, but it was something. Proved that her attempts weren't completely in vain, proved that it was possible. Maybe. She repeated the process 4 more times to make sure it wasn't a fluke, and felt lightheaded with giddiness. Progress. Now if she could only find a way to do something other than make it explode. Ino was furious, and she wasn't sure why. That was actually a lie. She knew exactly why she was mad, but she'd rather swear off boys than admit it. You know, I think you stare at her as much as Sasuke these days. Ino whipped her head around to glare at Shikamaru. I do not, she said indignantly. Besides, if I were, it would only be to gawk at her huge forehead. The words came easily, rehearsed and with less bite than they'd had before. It had been easy when Sakura had been her love rival, easy still when they fought for top marks and traded insults in equal measure. But ever since her sparring match with Sasuke, Sakura had retreated into herself, barely engaging with anyone. So now the end of their friendship meant nothing? Their rivalry that had been the whole reason for them splitting up was tossed aside so casually it made Ino's blood boil, because it made her feel like Sakura had tossed aside her as well. Had she ever meant anything to Sakura? Her former rival now spent all her time with Hinata and Shino of all people, so what was she supposed to think? Shikamaru glanced at her with one eyebrow raised, clearly not buying anything she'd said. It was infuriating how easily he could read her, but it worked out in the end. She didn't need to say much for him to understand what she meant, and she never needed to worry about him getting offended over things she didn't mean. Not that the lazy moron ever really got offended over anything. I thought you'd be happy, Shuji chimed in, stuffing a handful of chips in his mouth. You were always complaining about her liking Sasuke before. And she should be happy, so why wasn't she? You know, if you went up and talked to her, I don't think she would ignore you. Shikamaru said, leaning back in his chair. You were friends for a long time, I'm sure you could be again. Ino scoffed. Why would I ever want to be friends with someone with that big of a forehead? Her words carried over the class, easily loud enough that everyone could hear. Sakura glanced up, green eyes flashing with hurt before hardening. She then very purposely turned her back on Ino and towards Shino, not once glancing back. Have you completely forgotten about me? I'm Sakura nearly jumped out of her skin at the booming voice, the water affinity scroll that she'd managed to weasel out of Irika falling to the ground. Mabuki looked up from her place at the dinner table, thread still between her teeth yet managing to pull off a distinctly unimpressed look. Before she knew it, Sakura was scooped into a bear hug as Kaisashi plucked her right off the couch, her feet dangling in the air. Dad. She squirmed in his hold so she could properly get her arms around him. You're back. He ruffled her hair. That I am. I see you're still devouring books. What are you reading this time? He froze. Sakura followed his gaze to the scroll she had been reading, nerves she hadn't realized existed bubbling up. I found out my chakra affinities while you were gone. She said awkwardly, avoiding his gaze. I got water and earth. Her father may not be a shinobi, but he wasn't stupid, and he understood the significance well enough. She wasn't ashamed of it or him, she wasn't, but she understood what it could mean for her future and the way others treated her. His gaze softened. Just like your old man, huh? He rested his hand on her shoulder, squeezing reassuringly. Sakura smiled up at him, attempting to swallow the lump in her throat. Yeah, she said, her voice cracking. Yeah, I am. Mabuki gently cleared her throat. I'm not in the mood to cook, and doubt you are either after your trip. How about we eat out tonight as a treat? Kaisashi grinned. Sounds perfect. How about that place near your work? They have amazing dumplings. You and your dumplings. Mabuki rolled her eyes, setting down her needle. But I suppose since you just got back, you get to pick. With a grin, Kaisashi sidled next to Mabuki, kissing her on the cheek. You're the best. She put on a mock stern look. And don't you forget it? The three of them fell into a fit of laughter. Sakura waited until Mabuki went to their bedroom to change before turning to Kaisashi once more. Would you tell me about Kiri? She questioned. There isn't much that doesn't seem biased in the library, and she took a deep breath. And I really want to know. He didn't often talk of his homeland, the times he did were either littered with old fear and bitterness, or wistful fondness. It wasn't like he completely ignored where he was from, but despite the culture aspects he had taught her, Sakura still didn't know as much as she'd like to. It might even help with her elemental jutsu, seeing as water nature would be much more common in Kiri. He surveyed her, uncharacteristically silent. His hand had fallen to the compass at his waist. It was an old, worn thing, with waves carved into the metal on the side. She knew it was one of the few things he still had from his family in Kirigakure. A small, sad smile broke out across his expression. Of course. He said tenderly. What would you like to know? Irika brought his hand down, signaling for the two students in front of him to begin the match. Start. Ami immediately lunged for Sakura, arm outstretched as she aimed for her face. Sakura sidestepped the attack, causing Ami to stumble enough so that she could launch an attack of her own. The elbow that connected was well placed and effective. Sakura retreated slightly, causing the two girls to begin circling on another, Ami's expression furious yet undeniably wary. The next time they clashed, Ami managed to shove the Sakura to the ground, fighting to keep her mediocrely executed pin in place. Why don't you just give up? Ami sneered. Not like someone with that big of a forehead will ever amount to anything. Normally Irika would scold her, but verbal warfare was a part of shinobi battles, and real enemies would be much crueler than this playground teasing. Sakura rammed her forehead into Ami's nose, a loud crack ringing throughout the training field. From there she flipped their positions and placed an arm on Ami's throat. My forehead is actually quite useful, she said triumphantly. Match over. Sakura is the winner. To his knowledge this was the first time Sakura had ever beaten Ami in a spar of any kind. You broke my nose. Ami cried out, scrambling to her feet. Sakura stood taller, a proud smile dancing across her lips. Yes I did. If he didn't have to set a good example, Irika would have laughed. The day Sakura had been both dreading and wishing for had finally arrived. Exam day. Today was the day that she would either graduate the academy or be forced to stay behind a year. The latter was not an option. She made her way over to the pot on her windowsill, plucking a new seed from the box she kept them in. Sakura had been forced to start collecting them now that she was consistently exploding them. She was just glad it didn't make much noise. Her mother would have her head if she had to hear a loud bang on top of her father's antics. Despite her training, Sakura still didn't have much chakra to spare, and seeing as this was exam day, she did not want to be running low. So instead of pushing the usual amount, she gently let her chakra flow into the seed, tightly controlling how much she was using as to not let any go to waste. Time seemed to slow as an oak sprout just barely pushed itself out of the dirt. It was tiny really, could barely even be considered a sprout, but it was there. She did that. Her. A civilian-born nobody had just replicated the Mokyutan. The supposed Keki-i Genkai that the first Hokage had had. Oh Kami, she was going to faint. Sakura. If you don't get going you're going to be late. Crap. The exam. Chapter 6, Unexpected Teammates. The classroom was buzzing with excitement. 27 of the 32 students in their class passed, the other 5 forced to retake the year. Those who remained now sat at their desks, eagerly awaiting Irika to make the announcement. Sakura was practically vibrating in her seat. She'd done it. All her hard work had paid off. This was her first major step to becoming a jounin. She was a genin. Whose team do you think you'll be on, Sakura? Hinata questioned, her headband placed snugly on the base of her throat. That was something Sakura had pondered over for weeks. Considering her background and the fact that she didn't have any specialty, she would most likely be placed on a team with 2 other clanless kids and a competent, but not famous jounin sensei. It made sense. Ino, Shikamaru, and Chuji were destined to be on the same team, and she had a hunch that Hinata, Shino, and Kiba would be together as well. In all likelihood, she would be on a team with none of her friends. Worst case scenario, she got placed with her former bullies. It wouldn't be ideal, but they had been wary of her ever since she'd broken Ami's nose, and she was confident in her ability to push aside her grievances and work with them if she had to. Quiet. Irika boomed, the noise in the room immediately evaporating. I will be announcing your teams now. After that, your senseis will come to pick you up. You will be on your best behavior. It was not a request. Anticipation filled the air, everyone holding their breath. Team 6 will be Kageyama, Nami, and Toru. The 3 named glanced at one another, not friends, but friendly with one another. Team 8 will be Kiba, Shino, and Hinata. The latter 2 named shared a nod of acknowledgement. It was always nice to be right about things like this. It seemed that her ability to predict the teams was pretty good so far. Team 9 will be Saiko, Hato, and the Way Kid. Irika continued to list out names, glaring whenever excited whispering would break out. There were only 9 left who hadn't been called out, including her. Any more waiting and she might just implode. Team 7 will be Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura. What? Shock paralyzed her limbs and her mouth hung open. In all of the possible combinations of teams that she had thought of, this one had never crossed her mind. This was a nightmare scenario. There was no possible way she had heard Irika correctly. But Shino and Hinata's looks of concern, Naruto's shout of elation and Sasuke's scoff told her that this wasn't a prank or a wild dream she was having. It was real. All her carefully crafted plans and expectations were now thrown out the window, all her preparations now worth practically nothing. Her teammates were Naruto and Sasuke. Fuck. Sakura managed to wind her panic down to controllable levels in the ensuing minutes, pushing down her inevitable breakdown just enough to wish her friends luck when they left with their sensei. One by one, all the other students streamed out of their class until it was just the 3 of them left. Even Irika said he needed to get going for his shift at the mission desk. Half an hour passed. Then an hour. Naruto had taken up trying to get a rise out of Sasuke, who only responded with sneers and scoffs. Sakura did her best to go unnoticed by them, taking up residence in a corner to read a scroll she had brought. Hour 2 passed and there was still no sensei. Hadn't Naruto failed his exam? She had seen him sitting on the swing outside the academy yesterday and had witnessed his abysmal attempts at creating a clone. He had always been bad at chakra control. So why was he here? Hour 3 passed and Sakura was beginning to get irritated. Had their Jounin sensei forgotten about them? Was this a convoluted test of their patience? As time dragged on, the answer did not become any clearer. At least the waiting gave her time to come to terms with her new reality. A year ago, she would have been over the moon to be on the same team as Sasuke, but now she felt only discomfort. She still had not forgotten his cruel words. She'll never be anything but cannon fodder. She hadn't forgiven him either. He had not once apologized or showed that he was remorseful in any way, so he didn't deserve it. Sasuke had been unkind, and had clearly shown that he did not respect her. He thought he was better than her, and would have been her last choice to have on a team. Yet, here she was. It wasn't like Sakura was fond of Naruto either. She found him obnoxious, and his lack of care for book knowledge frustrated her. Not to mention he was always skipping class and making a fool of himself. He had even put up a small prank for their Jounin sensei, completely ignoring the fact that there was no way any shinobi worth their salt wouldn't be able to sense it coming. Halfway through hour 3, They heard footsteps. They all perked up, some more noticeably than the others, and the door opened. The chalkboard eraser Naruto had placed above the door fell, hitting the gray-haired man squarely on the top of his head before tumbling onto the ground. Seriously? The masked man clapped his hands together, his one uncovered eye crinkling in what she assumed was an indication of a smile. My first impression is, I hate you. Sakura balked at the harsh words, shock and confusion spreading as she stared blankly at the stranger. Meet me on the roof in 1 minute. And then he was gone. Sakura made it to the roof with 8 seconds to spare, allowing the competitive and pushing boys ahead of her a fairly wide girth. The man was there waiting for them, perched on the edge of the roof in a lazy crouch. That was pretty slow. He commented. We'll have to work on that. She pushed down a flash or irritation and smoothed it over her features. It was no use letting her anger take over here. She wanted to make a good impression and refused to let her temper win. Introduce yourselves, he said with little ceremony. Naruto frowned. What are we supposed to say? Why don't you go first, sensei? As much as Sakura agreed with him, did he have to be so loud? The man did his little eye smile again and released a contemplative hum. Well, my name is Kakashi Hatake. I like some things, and dislike others. My dream is my own business and I have a few hobbies. So we learned nothing but his name. Fantastic. Naruto was not as willing to remain silent. You barely told us anything, he burst out. Kakashi shrugged. Why don't you go next then, show us how you think it should have been done. Naruto straightened. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen and don't like the 3 minutes it takes for ramen to cook. My hobby is pulling pranks and my dream is to become Hokage, believe it. Sasuke made a disbelieving noise. That'll never happen, dead last. Naruto scowled. It will. And since you're so judgy, why don't you go? Sasuke rolled his eyes. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I dislike a lot more things than I like, including loud idiots. He continued over Naruto's offended squawk. My hobby is training and I will one day surpass my older brother. The three of them then turned to her. Sakura willed her racing heart to slow. My name is Sakura Harano. She began steadily. I like hanging out with my friends, and dislike having to wash my hair after a training session. My hobby is gardening-experimenting with the thought to be dead but not really. Keki I Genkai counted as gardening, right? And my dream is... She trailed off. Should she even bother? Her current audience wasn't ideal, so what would be the point of exposing her real goal? She already knew Sasuke's opinion of her, and who was to say that this jounin was any different? Do you care what they think? Kakashi watched as his only female student fell silent, a conflicted expression dawning her face. She squared her shoulders. My goal is to become a jounin, she said firmly. The baby Uchiha scoffed. To him, becoming a jounin was the minimum expectation. Of course he would get that high in the ranks, so why would he bother making a big deal about it? Anger flashed across Sakura's expression, her nails digging into her arm deep enough that he could smell the beginnings of blood. It was clear that none of them were satisfied with this team, and the chances of them working together were slim. They would likely fail his test tomorrow and he couldn't say he was sorry, despite the hell he knew Fugaku and the elders were going to raise. Aren't you an ambitious lot? Well, before any of that happens, you'll have to meet me at Training Ground 3 tomorrow at dawn. Naruto frowned. For what? He grinned sadistically. Survival training. Sakura had 3 ways to de-stress herself. First, was reading. She was practically a knowledge sponge, and there was no better way than to take her mind off something that was frustrating her. She could get lost in reading and ignore the unpleasantness of reality for as long as she stared at those pages. The second was working in her mother's shop. Her mother being tailor meant she'd been able to sew before she could walk, and there were days that the mindless menial labor was just what she needed. It was simple yet required enough concentration that she didn't have the brain space to worry about anything outside of what she was doing. The last was something she rarely did anymore, the activity something she wasn't able to do in the comfort indoors provided. Swimming in a river while the sun was about to start setting may seem like an idiotic move, but Sakura had been going through this route since before she'd entered the academy, and would be able to find her way home with her eyes closed. Sinking into the water was as calming as it always was. The cool evening air caused chills to run through her, and Sakura welcomed the cold before ducked under the rushing waves. When she had been younger and her father hadn't been away as much, he would take her to this place on bad days. They would stay there for hours, doing nothing but playing in the water and enjoying each other's company. When his merchant guild had begun growing, he'd end up leaving more for his trips. But every time he was home they would go at least once to this very spot. The river here was slow, not nearly fast enough to sweep away even the smallest of children. It was an optimal place to soak, its shores hidden amongst thick bushes. Sakura was hot-tempered, and she knew it. Small things could send her into a rampage or a panic, and those emotions could change on a dime. Being in the water felt like she was calming down, like the coolness of the river was seeping all of her irrationality and mood swings away. It helped her think, and right now, that was just what she needed to do. Fact 1, I am on the same team as Naruto and Sasuke. An unfortunate reality she was going to have to accept. She hadn't gotten this far by giving up when something was unpleasant. None of them were going to be able to work cohesively as a team, and any attempts to do so on their own would likely result in disaster, and considering they were mostly likely meant to be a combat squad, their chances of getting injured were much higher. Naruto hated book learning, Sasuke looked down on both of them, and Sakura wasn't fond of either of them. This was going to be a mess. Fact 2, our Jounin sensei is weird. Kakashi Hatake was probably famous. It wasn't like the Uchiha would be happy with just any random shinobi, and considering Naruto was an Uzumaki, one of the last alive after Uzashio had been destroyed, there would likely be push for him to have a good sensei as well. Even if he didn't have parents, where did he live anyway? She had also seen him hang around the Hokage more than once, so even if Kakashi was strange, he was likely very, very good. Fact 3, I was not put on this team to succeed. This was perhaps the hardest pill to swallow, but one she must regardless. Sakura was not fit to be on a combat squad, not really. She wasn't strong enough to be a frontliner, her theoretical knowledge and general competence more useful in information gathering. Naruto had seemingly endless stamina and enormous chakra reserves, and even if he struggled with the basics, he could be devastating in a fight if he learned a powerful jutsu. Sasuke was much the same, his speed and skill making him the best fighter in the class, and he already knew several fire jutsu. Sakura had none of that. She had above average chakra control and was a sponge for knowledge. She never shined in practical, only truly standing out in things that had to do with precise details. Putting her on a front-line combat squad made no sense, which meant she had been placed there for one reason. She was meant to be cannon fodder for the boys. She was conveniently high enough in the rankings that if you didn't look too hard you wouldn't see it, but it was clear as day to Sakura. Her civilian background had doomed her, and now her future was being defined by what she could do for others. It made her blood boil. Fact 4, I am not going to take this lying down. Sakura was not a quitter. She would drag the attention and respect of those in power with her bare hands, and she would do it gladly. Her future was her choice, not that of old men. Hoisting herself onto the bank of the river, Sakura placed her palms onto the mud and concentrated. Grow. The right amount of chakra, for the right amount of time, in the right place. It was hard to find and even harder to consistently get right. The cattails on the shore, which had previously come up to her shins, lengthened until they would brush her hips. Sakura would win in the end. Chapter 7, Failed teamwork does not make the dream work. The first thing Sakura did after waking up was disobey Kakashi's warning to not eat breakfast. If she had learned anything from yesterday, it was that he liked throwing them off, and she didn't trust that Kakashi hadn't said that to trick them. She kept it light just in case he'd actually been telling the truth, but also stuffed a few protein bars into her pockets. It never hurt to be prepared, and something told her that today was going to be as bad as yesterday, if not worse. Leaving already? Mabuki questioned, her hands curled around a mug of hot tea. Sakura slipped on her left shoe. Unfortunately. Mabuki released a light chuckle. Don't let those boys push you around, you hear me? Tell them your mother stabs things thousands of times for a living. Strange way to describe a tailor, but the thought of her mother chewing out Naruto and Sasuke was enough to make her snort. Don't worry. Sakura said with much more confidence than she felt. I'll be fine. Things were not fine. While Sakura immediately felt vindicated for her decision to eat breakfast and bring along extra food, their sensei being late for the second time by hours annoyed her to no end. He was supposed to be a good example. How were they supposed to learn anything if he was never there? When Kakashi eventually did show up, he completely ignored their questions about why he was late and instead settled for bringing them into the middle of the field. Despite what they told you at the academy, you are not genin yet. He held up a hand to silence their protests. Jounin senseis are within their right to preform a test that should their prospective team fail, they will be sent back to the academy to redo the last year. Fear gripped Sakura's heart. I can't go back. I won't. I've come too far to let this stop me. Kakashi held out 2 bells. You need to capture one of these bells to pass. You have until this clock hits noon to complete your mission. Feel free to use any tools you have at your disposal. She hesitantly raised her hand, unsure whether she should point out of obvious or not. Sensei. There are only 2 bells. He did the weird eye smile thing. Only 2 of you can pass. The last will be sent back to the academy. That couldn't be right. Genin teams were comprised of 3 genin and 1 jounin. If one of them got sent back, they'd be 1 short. Kakashi pressed the top of the clock. Your time starts now. Sakura's heart pounded loudly in her chest, fear threatening to swallow her whole as she crouched in the bushes. This test was ridiculous. There was absolutely no way 3 freshly minted genin could so much as scratch a jounin, never mind take an item that they were guarding on their person. Think, Sakura. She ordered herself, for once thankful of Naruto and his ability to be extremely obnoxious and distracting. For the moment it looked like Kakashi was occupied with him, so she had time to plan. Her mind was her greatest weapon, and right now she needed it more than ever. There had to be some kind of catch. There was no way Kakashi would be allowed to set them up for a test that was impossible to complete, so there was something they were missing. The time limit was set up to make them act rashly and the lack of food was supposed to make them sloppy and weak. Both were designed to enhance the pressure on them, but for what end? Just to make the already impossible task even harder? The bells. A part of Sakura hissed, causing her to nearly gasp aloud. Of course. There was no way he would be allowed to only fail 1 genin. All of them, maybe. But not just 1. That meant he wasn't going to fail the genin who didn't get the bell, because this wasn't about the bells at all. Just like the hunger and time limit, it was meant to make the true objective harder to obtain. But what? She snapped her fingers. Teamwork. That had to be it. Everything fit. Konoha was known for their teamwork, not to mention the bells were supposed to make the idea almost unthinkable because it was them or you, making it so that they were compelled to work against each other instead of with. Add that with the pressure of the time limit and the lack of clear thinking due to hunger, and it was a cocktail of competition. They wouldn't even consider working together. Triumph caused her to grin, allowing herself to quietly creep out of the bushes and deeper into the forest. Now that she knew the true objective, she could just. Sakura froze. She would have to convince Naruto and Sasuke to work together. With her, and each other. This was going to be a disaster. She found Sasuke first. He was neck deep in the ground and it took every ounce of self-control she had not to laugh at him. It took some work, but she managed to dig the top layer of earth away from him and help break him out. He scoffed at her outstretched hand and batted it away. I would have been fine on my own. That was a blatant lie, and quite hostile considering she just helped him, but she let it slide. I figured out the real objective. She said instead. It's not the bells. I think we have to work together and dash. I'm not working with you or dead last. He sneered. You'll just slow me down. He's a jounin. She argued. There's no way any of us could take him on our own. We're barely genin. I'm not pathetic like you. If you think it's impossible, why are you even trying? Sasuke looked at her with contempt. Sakura bit her tongue. That's what I'm trying to tell you. She snapped. The bells aren't the real goal, they're a distraction. Think about it. There's no way he could send 1 kid dash. Shut up. Sakura paused in disbelief. Was he seriously not even going to consider? You're annoying. Rage curled in her breast, and Sakura did nothing but watch as he vanished into the trees. She attempted to look for Naruto next, but was unable to find him. Perhaps he finally figured that his head-on approach was idiotic and had resorted to stealth while he recovered. Sakura knew he could be sneaky when he wanted to be. That was the only reason he wasn't immediately caught when he pulled his pranks after all. Still, she needed to convince at least one of them to work with her, and hopefully Naruto would be more agreeable. She burst into a clearing, doing her best to move as quickly and quietly as possible, ignoring the bushes and branches that stuck on her clothes as they continued moving through the... A scream spilled out of Sakura's lips before she could stop it. Her parents were laying motionless on the ground, blood pooling around them as the sun highlighted their gray skin. Nausea rolled through her as her stomach rebelled, threatening vomit. Tears collected at the corners of her eyes as she stumbled backwards and dug her nails into the palms of her hand. The pain helped TP clear her mind, and she became aware of the invading chakra beneath her skin. She raged against it, flaring her own chakra until the last bits were burned away and she got to watch the horrid genjutsu disappeared before her very eyes. Not real. Not real. She told herself, whipping tears from her eyes, and she forced herself to take deep breaths. It was just an illusion. A cruel, disgusting illusion, but one all the same. Well, how about that? Sakura shrieked and careened forwards, scrambling to get away from the voice that had appeared in her ear. Kakashi's eye crinkled. Lesson 3, Genjutsu. And then she was alone once more. Sakura craned her neck up, attempting to estimate the time they had left and 45 minutes. Sakura had completely foregone stealth and was just sprinting. Her legs and lungs burned, but she kept going. There wasn't nearly enough time to find the boys, much less convince them to work together, so she had one last gambit. The clock sat innocently on the log, its hands ticking along as if every second that passed wasn't bringing them one step closer to failure. 17 minutes left. She fished out a kunai and stuck the tip under the back of it, prying it open to reveal moving gears. After a bit of frantic experimentation, she forcibly removed the parts that caused the hour and minute hands to tick, stopping the clock from reaching noon and failing them. She did her best to bend the metal so that it couldn't be fixed and threw the screws in different directions. There was a chance that this would all be for naught, but Sakura had to try. 2 minutes after the clock would have hit noon, Kakashi came out of the forest with Naruto and Sasuke dragging along. He looked as happy as could be, despite the scowls and glares he was getting from his passengers. "Looks like you guys failed," he said cheerfully. "Not a single one of you got a bell." Sakura steeled herself. "No, we didn't." Kakashi turned his attention towards her. "Oh." She pointed to the clock, attempting to hide her nerves but probably failing miserably. "You said that we would fail when the clock hit noon. But it hasn't, so we don't fail." Both boys stared at her with a mixture of confusion and surprise. Sakura continued. "In fact, I don't think it will ever hit noon, so we have the rest of our lives to get those bells off you." Kakashi narrowed his eye. "Is that what you think?" She forced herself not to falter under his scrutiny. "You never said we couldn't tamper with the clock, so I haven't broken any of the rules. We haven't failed. Yet." Kakashi let out a laugh. "You have a point. We'll reconvene after lunch. Sakura, Sasuke, you're allowed to eat. Naruto, you're being tied to the pole." They had 30 minutes until Kakashi would come back, and Sakura planned to use every second of it. Opening her mouth to begin her argument once again as to why they should work together, she was cut off before she could even get a word in. "Here." Sasuke held out his chopsticks to a still struggling Naruto, causing him to pause in surprise. "You haven't eaten until yesterday, right? Without food you'll be even more pathetic than you normally are, and even if you don't stand a chance of succeeding, at least you'll tire him out for me." "But Kakashi said that we'll fail if you do that," Naruto said with a frown. "Why risk it?" Sasuke gestured around them. "He's nowhere in sight, and he likely took the clock to be fixed. Just eat, you'll slow me down even more if you're hungry." That was rude and assholish, but progress, and something Sakura could work with. "Wait," she interjected, digging through her pockets until she found what she was looking for. "I have some protein bars on me. They don't taste the best but they're filling, and that way we won't be low on energy either." Sakura was willing to bet she was doing better than either of them, considering she had eaten breakfast, but after all the running she had done she was famished. Naruto blinked in surprise, a grin creeping onto his face as he tore into the food. "Thanks Sakura." "Thanks Sasuke. We'll be able to kick his ass this time, yeah. Thank you for that opening." About that dash. Thunder crashed and a looming figure appeared out of nowhere, Sakura just barely containing her scream. "You disobeyed my orders." Kakashi growled, sending shivers down her spine. Had she been wrong? Was the test really the bells and she had just read into it too much? Oh no, had she made them fail? We're a team, aren't we? If Naruto is weaker, then so are we as a unit. Sasuke's tone was confident, but Sakura could see his hands shaking ever so slightly. If he could stand up to Kakashi, so could she. Pushing herself to her feet, Sakura stood beside him. That's right. Konoha is all about teamwork, so why should we be punished for helping ours? Please don't be a mistake, please don't be a mistake. You all. Sakura braced for disappointment. Pass. She nearly collapsed with relief. The only thing keeping her standing was the sheer embarrassment of the thought of her team seeing her do that. But then Kakashi's expression grew dark. Sakura had seen the memorial stone in pictures before, but never in person. There was something daunting about the sheer number of names carved into it. A stark reminder of what they were training to be, and how they would likely end up. In the shinobi world, those who do not complete their mission and disobey orders are trash. He met each of their gazes. But those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash. The intensity in his words made Sakura swallow. Meet me outside of the Hokage Tower at 6 a.m. sharp. And with a whirlwind of leaves, he was gone. Chapter 8, Weeding and Whining. Get out of my way, dead last. Nuh-uh. You're in my way. TCH. If Sakura heard one more word from either of them, these herbs would have more than just fertilizer to feed on. It had been 3 weeks since their team had formed, and even after their whole proclamation of teamwork, they were a mess. Naruto was constantly goading Sasuke, who responded with insults until they got into some competition or another, derailing what they were actually supposed to be doing. Sakura wasn't doing much better herself. She still hadn't forgiven Sasuke, and Naruto was just annoying and got on her nerves. She'd shouted at the pair of them more than once and just tried to avoid them. Kakashi was little help either. He was constantly reading a book, only interceding when one of them made a comment that was truly out of line. They had been doing D ranks ever since they passed the bell test, and for the most part, Sakura didn't mind. They were easy jobs like painting a fence or what they were currently doing, which was weeding an herb garden. It didn't interfere with her personal training much, and if she were being honest, they reminded her of home. When are we going to get a real mission? Naruto whined. If only the boys would stop complaining about them. Sasuke brushed the dirt off his shorts. For once the idiot has a point. This is a useless waste of time. I'm sure any civilian could do these jobs just fine. He said the word civilian like it was dirty, and Sakura's temper flared. It's character building. Kakashi said pleasantly, and it was really hard not to snap. Despite what the Naruto and Sasuke seemed to think, D ranks did serve a purpose. It showed the general population that shinobi were helpful and not completely terrifying, making the fear towards them lessen. It also served as a way for them to get skills they might need in infiltration. Long-term spies required specialized training, but short-term they might one day need to pretend to be a gardener, and be able to fake it well enough to sneak past scrutiny. Not that she felt like explaining that to either of them. I bet I can finish faster than you. Naruto proclaimed loudly. And then I'll be done and can use the money for Ichiraku ramen. As usual, Sasuke rose to the bait. There's no way you'll finish before me. He sneered. Naruto scowled. Just watch me. And began tearing out the weeds ridiculously fast. Sasuke scoffed, but he too began ripping out plants as quickly as he could, obviously unwilling to lose to Naruto in any way, shape or form. Sakura was content to just leave them. Hopefully they would be out of her hair then when she saw what they were doing. Stop! She shouted, startling both of them enough that they froze in their tracks. Are you both complete idiots? You're tearing up the growing herbs as well as the weeds. Naruto blinked. Oh, I didn't think that, he trailed off awkwardly. How were we supposed to know that? Sasuke snapped defensively. Sakura's temper rose like a tidal wave. Well, that's the thing, isn't it, she hissed. You don't think she jabbed a finger at Naruto. And you always assume things. Sasuke's mouth snapped shut. She couldn't deal with this right now. Leave. Both of you. I'll finish the job and replant the herbs. Just go. When they hesitated, she glared fiercely. Weren't you just complaining about how much you hated this? Well, here's your chance to leave. Go. Though she doubted either would admit it, both boys scrambled away, quickly disappearing from sight. Ma, Sakura, I have to admit, I wasn't expecting that. She flushed in a mixture of indignation and shame. They kept complaining about how boring and easy it was, and then screwed it up. It's not my fault they deemed this below them. And besides, if I had let them continue, we wouldn't get paid at all. His lone gray eye seemed to pierce right through her, but she stood her ground. You have a point, he said eventually. And then nothing else. Fury simmered just beneath her skin. Why couldn't B be useful as a teacher and mentor? Why was it her job to correct them when they barely listened to her unless she was literally screaming? Pathetic. I was not put on this team to succeed. Sakura took a deep breath and released it. Getting angry at Kakashi right now would accomplish nothing. Take that fire, that fury, and bury it inside your chest. Let it warm you when the world is cold and protect you from the monsters in the dark. Sakura could not afford to make any mistakes, could not afford to lose her temper. She was walking a fine line and one wrong move could tip the balance. Expendable, 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 expendable. She knew what had happened with Mizuki, knew that the man had been frustrated with how non-clan shinobi were prevented from rising in the ranks. Knew that he had enjoyed making fun of the clan kids when he could get away with it. Sakura had heard everything firsthand from Naruto, and it was hard to reconcile the man who had snuck her genin access scrolls with someone who was willing to kill her classmate. Was that her future? Was she destined to become so bitter and frustrated with the village that she betrayed it? What happens if they realize she won't play their game, that she refuses to be cannon fodder? She bit her tongue and ducked her head. I can finish on my own. He let out a hum which she took as her cue to get to work. In the end, it only took her an hour to finish weeding and replacing the herbs that had been torn out. The woman who had hired them raised an eyebrow when she appeared alone, but handed over the promised money. Sakura had calculated the amount of work they had split up, and was not surprised to find that she had done the most, earning over half of the money while the boys were left with barely enough to buy a meal. Part of her considered splitting it evenly, but the rest of her hissed that she did the most work, so she should get the most money. Regardless, she tucked the coins into her pouch, figuring that she'd just give it to them tomorrow. Because there was absolutely no way she was tracking them down. Kakashi had disappeared while she'd been collecting the payment, so she figured that was all the training they were going to do today. Like we ever actually do much training at all? Does going through formations we've been doing for years mean we're learning anything? That wasn't a completely accurate assessment, but it felt that way sometimes. Polishing techniques and increasing stamina were important, she knew that, but it still felt like she was behind with very little way to move forward. Sakura pushed down the intrusive thoughts and began making her way to her mother's tailor shop. It was past noon, and there was probably some menial jobs she could get done. Oi! Sakura! She jumped, whirling around to see who had decided to give her a heart attack. Shino, Hinata, Kiba, and a woman Sakura recognized from the day after graduation sat at an outside table, clearly in the middle of lunch. Kiba, the one who had shouted, waved her towards them. Get over here, Pinky. These two keep talking about you, so I figured I'd do them a favor. Hinata blushed brightly, stuttering out an incoherent response as Shino refused to look at her. She saw the tips of his ears turn pink as she got closer, though, and couldn't help but laugh. It's nice to meet you, the woman said with a kind smile. I'm Kurane. Sakura answered with a grin of her own. It's nice to meet you too. I'm Sakura, which you clearly already know. I find it likely the entire street knows. Why? Because Kiba is loud enough to wake a coma patient. Shino said evenly, his slightly too tight grip on his chopsticks betraying his agitation. Kiba scowled. At least I called her over instead of just staring at her like a creep. That's enough. Kurane said firmly, cutting off Shino before he could do so much as open his mouth. We don't want to cause a disturbance and get kicked out. The two boys glanced at one another and did their equivalent of a shrug, and just like that, everything was back to normal. I wish my sensei would do that. Slipped out of Sakura's mouth before she could stop it. Everyone turned to look at her. What do you mean by that? Hinata questioned. She hunched her shoulders. It's just my teammates are always fighting, and our sensei almost never steps in. It gets bad sometimes, and today they almost messed up the deer rank we were doing and I had to yell at them to stop. He just sits there or watches us. Kurane frowned. Who's your sensei? It doesn't sound like he's doing his job correctly. She let out a sigh. Kakashi Hatake. Kurane froze. Hatake, she said incredulously. They let him have a genin team. Sakura blinked. Yeah. Kurane shook her head. That man should not be training you kids. He shouldn't be anywhere near anyone fresh out of the academy. So it's not dash. Kurane softened. It's not you. Honestly, I would consider requesting a team change if you haven't already, or at the very least a different instructor. Who are your teammates? Sakura hesitated. Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha. Kurane blanched. Sage's sake, kid. She held out a dumpling, ignoring Sakura's protests. Take it, you deserve it. Kiba tossed a cut of meat into his mouth. If I had to be on the Uchiha's team I would have pushed him off a cliff by now. He eyed her closely. Though frankly, you don't seem that far off from doing that yourself. That startled a laugh out of her. Yet it's been horrible. Frustrating. Rage-inducing. An experience. She settled on. Kiba snorted. So what you really mean is that it's been a clusterfuck? Yes. It kind of surprised her that Kiba had paid so much attention. He often seemed a lot like Naruto, loud with little manners and always looking for a brawl. It hadn't occurred to her that he would be this observant. I'm sure it'll get better. Hinata reassured her. We're all still learning, right? Sakura attempted a smile. There's always hope. Sakura took it back, there was no hope. 2 weeks after the weeding incident, Team 7 was standing before the Hokage, and everyone was pretending this was normal. Naruto was way too casual with the leader of their village, and Sasuke was indifferent. Kakashi looked as amused as always, but honestly who was surprised by that? We want a real mission, old man. Naruto crowed. I'm a shinobi now. Give me something that's not hunting down a cat. Sakura wanted to bash her head against a wall. How could he be saying this to the most powerful man in Fire Country? She knew he wasn't smart, but she hadn't thought he was completely stupid. Thankfully, the Hokage only chuckled fondly. As a matter of fact, we have a C-rank escort mission for your team. They all perked up at that, even Sasuke looked as though he were actually paying attention. It's to the land of waves. The Hokage continued. You'll be escorting a bridge architect and making sure he stays safe until the structure is finished. It should take minimum a month for its completion. That was a long time to be away from home. Do you have any questions? Sakura stepped forward. How long will we have until we need to be ready? She resisted the urge to hunch her shoulders as his gaze landed on her for the first time. Why would he look at you? You're nothing but cannon fodder. You will have around an hour, though I wouldn't dawdle. The Hokage said calmly. You wouldn't want to be late for your first C rank. Unconsciously, all three of the present genins' gazes slid towards Kakashi. You're late. Snipped the likely drunk bridge builder. And this is my protection detail? A blonde brat, a moody vampire and a pink girl. This is what Konoha has to offer. It took every ounce Sakura's self-control not to lash out. This mission is going to be a disaster. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.